Greetings. Today I wish to show some information about how a Girardoni rifle is constructed. I had to field strip the gun today because this is the striker spoon, and the repeated firing had caused this to seize a little bit, so I had to go in and clean it up, reassemble it. So now while I have to put the gun back together, I'll do that. On this end, you can see the bottom of the receiver, the breech block, the sliding bolt, going down the barrel all the way down to that end. You can see the lugs that affix the stock, the magazine tube running here, the leaf spring here. When this allows the breech block there's a cavity inside this end. When it slides here, a ball can fall from the magazine into it, and it lines it up with the barrel. The back, the transfer port runs through the casting here, contiguous with the barrel. We have an index mark here for where the breech and the barrel were put together. The barrel is made out of a Green Mountain 45 caliber smoothbore that was then rifled to 32-inch right-hand twist, 457 to the bottom of the grooves. The bronze casting was purchased, oh gosh, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. Fortunately, I didn't have to make that one. Everything else pretty much was fabricated on the gun. So, other things here on the table is we have the stock itself, and it is very beautifully done by Hank. It's extremely light, very thin, made of English walnut. Something that you will only see on one other Girardoni are these two little pieces of wood that stick up. Later I will mention that, but on every one but one they are broken off, which would then allow, that normally goes into this area, sealing between the receiver and the breech blocks. On those that are missing, that allows dirt, water, etc. to fall directly into the receiver and fouling the interior. Another one of the little Girardoni problems. Over here we can see the side plate cast in bronze and the lock. And we'll go over more detail of that as I put it in. And on the far end of the table is our leather strap for holding it on with the swivels there, the trigger guard, trigger plate, trigger itself, and then just a few tools for putting it together. I'm going to shift the camera now to over my work area so I can start assembling. Okay. The way the Girardoni works, it has a lock. One thing that's unique about it is it has a flat mainspring, a fairly hefty piece of iron. The steel in this case is spring steel. And when the unit is cocked, it flexes that downward. That is our half cock and full cock. And normally when it's in the gun, you cannot go past the full cock too much like I just did there and over center it. But you can see the deflection of this nice big chunk of steel. Now also, you can see this wedge here. It's called the wedge. It basically is a projection from the tumbler. And when that comes forward, this is in relationship to that. Then as it fires and swings back, it catches that notch there, pushing this backwards, driving this pin into the valve. Okay, so this is what I call the striker spoon because it's somewhat spoon-shaped. This is the sear, the trigger would come up against it, allowing this to swing around, catching that. I'll try to show that in the unit. As it comes around, this will allow this to drop beyond it and return the valve to its normal position. The spoon goes through a hole here, and as you can see, it comes out the back of the receiver. And this is where the butt flask would go and the valve. Now, the spoon is held against, kept upward by a little leaf spring. And this is that leaf spring, and that is captured, and it's fairly taut. Keeps that in place. All right, to retain that, the only way to get that out is basically this is so well inlet for everything by Hank that the spoon fits right into that area there. So you cannot remove this spoon and rod without removing the stock. So carefully, so I don't break these off. And this is the tricky part, trying to keep everything from falling apart. That slides there, and that there. Pin there. Pin forward that you won't be able to see, but it's not all that exciting to watch it go in. It retains the front of the stock. Now the stock is in place. There will also be a screw that for the strap swivel that will also hold it in place. Now, next thing to go on is a trigger plate. And as you can see, that is inlet into there. And then the trigger. The trigger is an odd shape. Hank took this out of a solid piece of steel, then forged. This is all started from one piece of steel. This is not soldered together, but that is all hammered, the spoon of the trigger. So you have to kind of thread it in there thusly. Now there is another screw here. This passes through there, and there was a oblong slot in the spoon, and that passes through that to keep the spoon from going forward or back. From what I understand on later knockoffs of the Girardonis, that was left out. And this is tightened down. Okay. Now, I wish to have the screw put into place, into the trigger screw. You'll notice I'm using a period correct plastic handled screwdriver that has been ground to take the V-shaped slots of these screws. Okay, so you can see right away we have the spoon that can move up and down by action of the spring. We have the trigger that moves back and forth. It has, I don't know, a little space here, which when it trigger moves, it can catch the sear as this goes in. Now, before I place the lock in, the screw will be covered by the hammer, so I will go to half cock. Something interesting that was designed by Girardoni, you'll notice there's an extra hole in the lock plate. If we flip it over, you can see that you can place a pin in here. By going half cock and releasing it, it will hold tension on the mainspring so that you can remove the tumbler. It does not require a spring vise. And then this threads in here. And it falls into place. Okay, so there we have the lock in place. Now, I'm going to leave the side plate off for a little while. Here we have the trigger guard. This was waxed in a machinable wax, sent to the foundry, cast in bronze. Hank did a wonderful job on the design and finish of these. And inletting into the wood. And this screw actually goes in at an angle, which is kind of odd, but that's simply because of the way the design is to clear a lot of the junk that's inside the area there. So I'll just put that in partly. Now comes the tricky part, because we have the trigger guard, the lock plate, the spring, and the receiver. And everything has to kind of line up at the same time. Now, some of the literature talks about the soldiers having problems with this pin, that they would remove it and clean it up. Got news for you. You're not going to strip this thing down to be able to get that pin out in the field. That is something that has to be done basically at a bench. There's way too many bits and pieces going on there, so I think that's kind of BS that they were able to do that. Now, when I do this, what I have to do is make sure that this spring is not too far off and that I have freedom of movement in here. I don't know if that's clear or not, but now you can see that spoon can move up and down. Okay, that's why I left this plate off, so that I can ensure that. When Hank makes, I machine these screws with extra long heads and then give them over to Hank. And Hank will figure out the indexing because he likes all the screws pointing in the same direction. However, when he makes a screw slot, he does it just like they did in the 18th century. They have files that come to a V. Instead of a bottom edge slot, they're a V-shaped slot. So they're nothing like a modern screw, and you have to be a little more careful, or you get what was called Yankee engraving, which means you slip and screw up the metal around it. Okay, so let's see here. Go to full cock. All right, it's working. Now, notice that there'll be 3 clicks if everything is together correctly. I don't know if the lighting is good. Let me take a quick look in the viewfinder. And okay. As I do this, Let me just see if I can make it so everybody can see. As I pull this back, there should be a first click. Okay, they saw the spoon jump up onto the wedge. There'll be a second click. Okay, we are now at half cock. Okay, third click, full cock. We're ready to fire. Now, here's the wedge. There's the spoon. The wedge is going to swing down, catch that spoon, pushing it rearward like this, pushing the pin out the back, which will press against the valve in the buttstock. After it has passed the wedge, it will be able to pop back forward by the spring valve, the tension in the valve in the flask, pushing it back forward, thusly. I'm going to try now to keep it in focus and fire it. So here it comes around, catches the spoon, pushes the spoon back. You can see it protruding, and it disengages. Okay, at this point, the valve would spring that forward again. We have about a 1/4 inch of travel with this mechanism. Good. All right. So all that remains now is to put a couple drops of oil here and there and replace the side plate. And the side plate, again, here's that other piece of wood that's broken off on the maul. You can see if this were broken off here, that would allow everything to fall into this chamber, dirt, grit, whatever, causing problems. So there is how the side plate affixes, and 2 screws hold that down. I'm going to do the firing sequence again here just in case, so I don't have to come back here later. Okay, so the spoon is forward, and you can see the spring is holding it tight against the wedge there. Okay, so as we cock, we hear the first click. We have now engaged the striker. If I were to let go of this, it would place pressure and push the valve back. And depending on how much pressure is in the tank, that could cause the thing to prematurely fire. So there's the first click, half cock. You can see how the trigger popped forward there a little bit. Okay, then full cock. Now, notice the wedge moving rearward. Oh, let it go too fast. It picked up the spoon, pushed out the pin. Pin would push forward again. Let me try it again. First click, you saw the spoon move up against the wedge. Half cock, the trigger moves forward. Full cock. Here we go. Wedge coming down, catching the spoon, driving the pin rearward, disengaging from the spoon, spoon popping forward. So some people call it a cam action. It's not really a cam. That's basically the inner workings of this sucker.